Thank you. Tell me if I'm too loud or too soft as we go. I'm just absolutely delighted to be here today, both to meet with those of you that are here and to speak to those of you that are virtually present and those of you that will get to see this archived. I have been at the Mass General since 1982, so quick math, just a little over 37 years. I consider myself a lifer, and it continues to be really a privilege to be here. And I'm particularly excited to talk about the lessons learned from our cancer program, Parenting at a Challenging Time, which really addresses the kinds of skills that parents can learn in order to support the resilience and well-being of their much-loved children during the course of a parent's treatment and beyond. So I'm going to talk some about the lessons learned, but I wanted to start a little bit with what's available to you. And in terms of disclosures, I'll just say two things. One is that the Harvard book that's at the back of the room, I and another colleague get royalties on about $200 a year. And also there are free website related products that are through WGBH. So the Arthur cartoon, and I consult Arthur, Molly from Denali, Curious George, and Pinklicious. So those are my rather funny disclosures. We have a deep website, www.mghpact.org, that is available to anyone. If you click through on that website, there are over 100 pages of pretty targeted parent guidance for parents with cancer. We hear from many other parents with serious illness that they find the materials also helpful. And we have recently in the last year started a program here in the ALS clinic. So in particular, I have experience with families where a parent has CF or ALS. Here at the Cancer Center, we provide individualized consultations that are patient-driven, and I'll tell you more about that. But what we're aiming for is to be co-collaborators along with parents who are really the experts on their own children and see the whole movie. When someone comes in to see a provider of whatever sort, I happen to be a child and adult psychiatrist, but when a parent comes in, any of us, or brings a child into one of us, what we see is the snapshot, and parents know the movie. It's a little bit like watching a mole. I'm not sure that's a great analogy. That I believe it will stay with today's lecture and I'll never use it again. But if things are evolving that you notice as a parent, that's what we also want to know about. Not that anyone's child is a mole. Our program has been running for about 22 years, actually, and we've had the privilege of seeing thousands of parents and that we've served in direct consultations and many more thousands of children we've impacted. Our website is widely used by people around the world, and we just finished a 10-hour CEU and CME course that we were able to offer thanks to the Lynch Foundation, that 500 clinicians finished in the basic training. We are in the process of setting up PACT courses, PACT clinics kind of elsewhere, or at least training people at other sites. So we currently have clinicians at Smilow, at Stanford Cancer Institute and Lucille Packard. We are in the process of training people at Rush in Chicago. And hopefully smattered now, there are 519 more clinicians with at least some basic training thanks to the course that ended this past year and will run again in this coming year. We really believe that just like all the other expert care that families receive in the hospital, that parents deserve the same kind of expert parent guidance. Most parents look to their neighbors, to their family members for guidance on on-site training that is every parent's experience of parenting, but the kinds of supports that guide us in how old should my child be when they have a sleepover, how about sleepover camp, how about riding a bike, how about switching daycares. All those kinds of inputs are trickier to find from people that inspire confidence. And when we did a little bit of patient satisfaction surveying, what we found is that one of the things that was highly important to the families that we saw is that they felt like they could trust us, that it wasn't that they weren't getting a fair bit of advice from people, but if you're getting advice and you have a little bit of a feeling in the back of your mind that maybe the advice is not really about your child, then it's hard to enjoy that advice in the same way. You'll be not surprised to hear that families are interconnected. I like this picture of a mobile, you know, the way if you hang something heavy, something else moves. So that's how families are. So what affects a parent affects a child, and vice versa. In a perfect world, our electronic medical record would actually flag for a pediatrician when a parent has a serious medical illness, and our system would help to keep reminding us that families function in this interconnected way, but we're not there yet. Individuals are also unique, so it's not a one size fits all. And so it is finding that balance between what are the common things. As Laura said, when you can expect something, you can cope better. I always say confusion is the enemy of coping. Tell me what I should be watching for. Let me know what to expect, and then I can be prepared. A little bit like when you get on an airplane and the flight attendant says parents should put their own oxygen on first. And I have done quite a bit of work with the military, and one of the wives of the 4-star generals said to me, as they moved every 18 months through the lives of their children, she said, one of my rules for my husband was, I need to see the new house first. I need to cope with it, then I can sell it to the kids. So when parents are prepared, kids cope better. In terms of what, there's a long literature and it's a different talk, but I was trying to hit some of the highlights for today of things that I thought would be most relevant. And let me step back for a second and say, this is grandchildren too. And one additional thing that I would just say about the grandchildren part is that it kind of helps if the adult parents who are children get together a little bit and talk about how are they going to talk about a grandparent's melanoma, because the cousins are going to talk to each other. And sometimes it kind of ambles along until a big holiday. And then everybody gets together and things start to devolve. So kind of planning in advance so we want adults, we want caring adults to be the one to deliver hard news to kids. We don't want other kids. I'm not a huge fan of Siri as being an educator of children. And now that kids from a pretty young age will Google things, they are getting a lot of information and really unprocessed from the internet, and without a grown-up who knows them and cares about them even knowing about it. So that's another issue that is front and center in our consultations, and I would encourage you to think about. The little bit of data that there is, and it is definitely growing data on how children are impacted by a parent's cancer, not particularly melanoma, but cancers in general, is that the things that affect a parent's ability to engage in parenting, those regular activities. Can a parent drive? Can a parent go to the park? Can a parent get down on the floor and play with their child? Can they remember what was said to them? Are they sleeping through general mealtime? Those symptoms that may be secondary to a cancer, but also maybe secondary to the treatment, are really important things to focus on. So I'm a huge fan of palliative care. I always refer to them as the symptom doctors. Hopefully that's not sounding disrespectful, but I find that the very things that affect quality of life also typically affect parenting, and addressing them early and often makes a huge difference in the lives of kids. And so I encourage those to be attended to early and often. Also, a parent's mental health. That's the parent who has the melanoma and their co-parent or other parenting adults in a child's life. So when a parent or a key caring adult in a child's life is depressed or anxious, remember that mobile, it affects the child. So getting treatment, sick and well parent, makes a big difference. It's interesting that in not a huge study, but a decent study, the stage of cancer and the type of cancer didn't actually determine the child's level of adjustment. Parents imagine it will, but actually from a kid's perspective, it's, are you showing up? And are you showing up to play dinosaurs and trucks? And if you're not, what are the ways can you engage with me that help me to know that you care about me? And when you can't do something, making it a word that I know is not real, but is one of my favorites, talkaboutable, so that when kids are stringing together their narrative of what they're seeing of a parent or grandparent's illness, that it's clear and front and center that the parent who can no longer get down on the floor is not disinterested in trucks and dinosaurs. Their hips just can't do it anymore. Or the parent who is listening to a child talk about getting 100 on a spelling test and falls asleep would be so upset with themselves if they knew they fell asleep in the middle of it, but the medicine that the parent is taking is making them very sleepy, and that's the bad part of it. The good part is helping the parent with the pain they're having, or some explanation. But if we're all writing our autobiographies all the time and editing them, and the goal is all the pictures and videos that kids are seeing, if you will, of their lives unfolding. We really want those caring adults in a kid's family to be writing the text with their child and making sure they know collaboratively what is it that I'm seeing and why, and connecting that to family values. Because that, that's the secret sauce to having kids cope well. Kids aren't the same, and parents know that. So we bring, as our team of child psychiatrists and child psychologists and a child-trained social worker, we bring knowledge about child mental health and stage of development. What are the milestones and different times in development? We always joke that few people say, geez, junior high, that was so fun, 13, 14, can I do that again? So there are certain times that are more problematic. The terrible twos that are often terrible threes and fours. Not every parent would love to go through those again. So thinking about what's normative for a child and connecting that with the particular challenges that come from the natural history of melanoma and its treatments. We are interested in what a child's pre-existing strengths and challenges are, what a child's temperament is. Temperament is sort of code for the typical way a child reacts to something. Kids have different temperaments, just like grown-ups have different personalities. But how a child typically relates to change, new people, new environments, a disruption in sleep schedule, those things tend to have a certain kind of stability to them. And so they help us to predict, when we're collaborating with a parent, what kinds of disruptions at home or just changes may be particularly challenging for one child and like great fun for another. So that temperament piece is an important one. And then thinking about, every family is different. They have their own strengths, they have their own challenges. And then the kinds of supports that individual families have vary, and who that support team is, who your go-to people are. You wouldn't go usually you would go to somebody different to ask a question about how to decide who the best babysitter is from the person you would go to talk about your estate. So thinking about who are your go-to people and how can they support you during this time. And always we come to this, the bottom line is parents are the experts on their own children. Their children know them well too. We are not trying to change parents. We're trying to give them new tools to face these particular challenges, but we want their children to recognize them as themselves. And we're not going to be the one delivering this news, the parents are. So what we want to do is be sure that they have the information and help they need, and that tends to be addressing words and worries. We are a resilience program, what public health people would call secondary prevention. We take a high risk or higher risk population, which is kids of parents with a serious illness, and we address those challenges. Most kids thrive. The majority of kids may have reactions as you would expect them to a parent's illness, but most kids stay on their developmental trajectory and they become whoever they were going to become. And I will just plant one more little flag and say America's children are currently very anxious. So the fact that a child is anxious does not mean that the parent's illness is necessarily the cause of that. In a study that was done, a Gallup poll that I had the kind of fun opportunity to put a question on, the question was for kids 8 to I think 17, that might have been to 16, have you worried about the health or well-being of your parent in the last 24 hours? And we did it because we were thinking about military children who had parents who deployed. It turned out that over 40% of children, non-military, just every kid has worried about the health or well-being of their parent in the previous 24 hours. So that's just gives you a clue of a little window in. This is saying what I've already said, which is that a child, if you think about the lens through which a child sees a parent's illness, it's their stage of development, their temperament, their individual challenges, kids with ADD, kids who are good at school or not good at school in particular ways, artistic, not artistic, family functioning, which includes cohesion. Does this family kind of hang together, or is there a lot of discord? How attuned is our parents? Again, part of the secret sauce, feeling that somebody gets your experience is really, really helpful at a hard time. And then what those community supports are, and that school is a big one because that's for most kids, but church, after school, coaches, the neighborhood, all of the above. And so those are things that we are fleshing out in the course of an individual consultation, and information on that is found on the website and similarly in the book. Parents are like the best collaborators ever. They are uniquely qualified to support a child's emotional well-being. They have this long, loving relationship. They know how their child has responded to smaller changes in the past. They have full investment. It is really an incredible privilege to do the work that our team does. And so many of the specific things that we end up talking about in our individual consultations come from wise parents with lived experience. So I say ours is a partnership between learned and lived experience, which I have found to be quite remarkable. It's referred to as psychological education. We are able here at the hospital to provide our consultations free of charge, and not as if no one has a diagnosis. It's an educational process, and we are anticipating challenges. The keys to supporting a child's coping, trying to keep things as normal in the daily routine or the family routine. The emphasis on predictability is more so during uncertainty. If other things are changing, then it's even more important to feel that a bunch of things are the same. Bedtime is the same. Waking up and breakfast choices are the same. When you go to school, it's nice to have whatever it is that you were supposed to bring in, the 9 raisin boxes, the oatmeal container for the pinhole camera, all these things that you're like, how was I supposed to know that I needed to? The things that are crumpled up in an elementary school kid's backpack that gets discovered at night. So partnering with schools too to make sure that the day at school is also predictable, expectable. What might be going on there that may have some connection to a parent's illness, a science project. Or being sure that kids have what they need when they're at school, and keeping things as much the same as possible, but also recognizing that they're not going to be the same, and talking about the things that you can and cannot predict with kids helps. Protecting family time and family routines as well. There's data that kids cope better when their families have some traditions. It's a little bit because under stress, it's easy to just put one foot in front of the other and do the stuff that you always do, as opposed to being creative. The bandwidth for creative parenting kind of shrinks when things are more disrupted and anxious. What kids say is that sometimes the people that are the well-wishers, that when people come over with that casserole, the parent who has been fatigued with treatment, they kind of buck up and they show the outside world their strong voice, their smiling face. They receive the casserole, which the kids do or don't want to eat. They close the door, and then they turn back into their sort of dish rag self, the real one. And kids feel like that their parent is bringing their A game for everybody else and not for them. So again, sort of thinking about what's the face that the children see as compared to the outside world, and making sure that the kids get the best of you. Not in the negative sense of that, but in the positive sense of being able to bring your A game for your children. We talk a lot about facilitating communication. You heard the same from Laura. Because the words to use with kids are a little more nuanced by age, we tend to go through some basic things that we talk about. How do you talk about cancer? And I'm going to give you just a little snapshot in and refer you again to the website or to, if you're here, our individual consultations. And also thinking about what are the best times to talk with a child. So parents can almost always say, oh yeah, driving in the car, just before bed, when I'm washing the dishes and my child is behind me. Often kids read face. And because they're not sure that the information isn't going to be a little overwhelming, and that face, when your emotions go up, your word finding goes down. So kids will often ask their questions when they don't have to look a parent in the face. And so those typically are the places, but in all the changes that are going on, prioritizing those can be really important. And then parents are uniquely positioned to engage the other supports. We talk about a captain of kindnesses. This is a way, again, of being able to have parents bring more of their energy, their emotional energy, to their kids, someone who is sort of the buffer and helps to organize people. I will sometimes have suggest to parents, ask your teenager what's the dumbest thing that anybody has said to you about your melanoma or other cancer. And the parent will usually say to me, can I tell you the dumbest thing someone has said to me? And they're usually remarkably stupid. There's probably a nicer way to say it, but I think what happens is when people get dysregulated by hearing that someone they care about is sick, and they go into their own emotional register and start to leak about their own experience, and then the person who actually is living with an illness or treatment is left in the position of trying to take care of the person who's now been dysregulated by the thought of it, and or hearing about other people's either inappropriate treatments relative to the individual or other things that truly miss the mark. I'm not sure where people are supposed to get the education about listening to someone who has an illness and the difference between sympathy and empathy. So sympathy is what you think you would feel if you were in that situation. And sympathy, whilst well-meaning, is rarely that helpful. Empathy is understanding actually what is it like for somebody else and what might actually be helpful from their own perspective. And somewhere it would be nice that if this could be more globally shared. And then we also sometimes talk about a minister of information, sometimes in a school community, particularly with kids. If there's not a plan of how the information is going to get shared, somebody will decide it's their job, and they will share it in ways that are not respectful of the parent's privacy or necessarily good for the kids. So thinking about that piece, quite often I will hear from people in middle age that it's easier to tell their children about their diagnosis than their elderly parents. So also thinking about within families, do you have an adult sibling who may be the one to communicate to the rest of the family, so that for the parent who is dealing with treatment, or for their co-parent, that a lot of energy is maybe not going to that, to talking to the extended family, and also that it affords the extended family members the chance to react, put their own oxygen on, and come really organized and ready to be helpful. So it's a gift on both sides. Some families use the various kinds of websites for getting functional help, logistical help, and there should be a point person at school for kids who does not disrupt the kid by like appearing, but who the child knows is their go-to person if they're having a hard time. Open communication's been most studied and supports child resilience. I want to just spend a couple of minutes talking about, just to give you more examples. So we tend to work with parents about what words to use to describe, for example, a cancer, and the flower and weeds version is like dandelions, you know, that we need to pull up the dandelions in the garden because if we don't, they keep seeding and growing around. That's what cancer does too, and all the treatments are kind of like weed killer. Either sometimes you pull up the weed, and sometimes you put you do radiation, which is the same as kind of weed killer. More commonly now, because we see fewer parents who feel like their kids know about gardens. So now we tend to talk about Legos, that your body is made up of millions and millions and millions of teeny weeny cells that are like Legos. And Legos that are healthy can do their job, and they have an on-off switch that, unlike the Legos you buy in the bag where you have to keep buying a new bag, the cool thing about cells in the body, they're Legos that know just when to replace themselves. But cancer cells are mixed up. They don't fit together right. They can't do their jobs, and they have a broken on-off switch. And so the treatments are to either take out the cancer cells that are like messed up Legos that don't fit together right and can't do their jobs, or they have a messed up on-off switch, and the different treatments are designed to address their on-off switch. I think I need some more language around immunotherapies. Really what you hear when everybody kind of goes, yeah, open communication is good, but I only want to tell my child as much as they need to know, and I don't want to overwhelm them, and I'm worried that I'll get upset. I'm worried that they'll ask a question I can't answer, particularly about death. And so we address under the worries categories, what are all the obstacles to communication, and these are some. One of the things that I would just underscore is that the fact that a child gets upset when they hear bad news means that they understood the news, not that they shouldn't have been told. And and if they don't get told, then they don't get to process difficult news with the people who love them best and know them best. So it's the wrong yardstick to say, oh, I should never have told my child because he or she got upset. It's like, yeah, and you were there to talk about it and keep talking about it going forward. There's a parent communication handout at the back of the room, and for people that are here virtually, we posted it on the website too, so you can download it from the website that has more specifics about communication. The basics, and I would say this is the basics about communication regardless of what you're communicating, to make your house a place where you welcome all questions warmly. That's a really good question. What got you wondering about that? I'd love to hear your questions. Encouraging kids to elaborate. Well, maybe sure, I really understand that. Tell me a little bit more. Good questions deserve good answers. How can I understand better? What's the, tease out what's the question behind the question. Knowing that questions don't have to be answered immediately, neither do consequences for bad behavior. You'll find that a consequence for bad behavior is much more effective if you say you have to think about it than if you give it immediately. But saying, I need this consultation from somebody. I want to talk to, yada yada's mom. She's really good at this, or dad. I'm going to talk to our rabbi or our minister. I want to talk to somebody at school, or I want to talk to my medical team. Let me be sure I understand what your question is. Excellent modeling. Good questions deserve appropriate answers, and you go to different people for different information, and you keep prioritizing those best times for reflection and discussion. Being honest is good advice. It just is something that nobody really knows what it means. I have like a 2-hour Be Honest lecture. So very simply, it is giving the name of what the illness is so that kids don't confuse what a parent has with something else. And so that they have the opening ticket to have a conversation. It also means talking about what they'll see on the web if they go there. And how I think about this is, if you read research on the web, think about it as Fenway Park. What you're hearing about in research is everybody who was at Fenway Park, everybody with one diagnosis. What our family is interested in is only the person that's sitting in one particular seat. If they were thinking about age, there could be a 7-year-old, a 37-year-old, and an 87-year-old sitting side by side. It's important for scientists, researchers, to be thinking about both the range and common patterns that are in the whole of Fenway Park. But for our family, we're interested in what's happening in one seat. And for that, we need to get our information from our own medical team that is following the trajectory of one patient, the path of one patient, our family member. So don't Google alone. and talk about it, and encourage kids to do that, not flooding kids with details so that they can formulate their own questions, remembering that information is going to be worst if it's overheard, and kids overhear all kinds of stuff. So they need to be invited to share what they've heard, either from people outside the home or inside the home. And then talk about feelings that many times parents will say to me, I want my children to grow up and be happy. And I would just say, like, who do you know who grew up and was flatline happy? I mean, it's a nice thought, but it actually doesn't match life or human beings. So much better to talk about ups and downs, hours of the day, days of the week. You'll see me sometimes having good times and bad times. It really, if there's something that has changed in my care and my treatment, I'm going to tell you. So don't imagine that because some days I'm grumpy or tired or whatever, that necessarily that means that the cancer has gotten worse. And I remind patients of the same when their medical providers come in the room. Many patients are reading the provider's face, and that provider may have just gotten a page from somebody that is short one number to be able to answer the phone call, and that may be all over their face when they walk in, nothing to do with the patient's own experience. So it needs to be talk aboutable. We remind kids not to worry alone, and we tell adolescents, if you talk with us, if we understand what you're worrying about, we can problem solve together. If you don't talk to us, we're going to worry about you, and worrying about you is going to be way more annoying than worrying with you. Worry with you, and we can problem solve. Worry about you, and we're just flat out annoying. We talk about different ways of communicating, texts and journals and other things. And then who are good go-to people for kids to talk to if they don't want to talk to a parent, but they want to talk about changes at home or other things of concern to them. The basic model for hard conversations: first, try to understand what it is that led to a child's questions or what they have already noticed. So what's the baseline? Where are you starting from? If you launch into an explanation without knowing what the starting point is, it doesn't go so well. Check in with yourself before you start. What are you most worried about hearing or saying? Many times I've had parents say to me, oh, my child has never asked about this to do with my treatment. After we talk through how they would answer those questions, they'll say, I can't believe it. Like within 2 days of having met with you, my child asked that question. There is something in the air. Kids read their parents well. When a parent is relaxed, kids will ask their questions. Talk about why you don't want to say what you don't want to say, and figure out who your wise parent friends and professionals are in your support network. At the end of the day, what we are doing is trying to be sure that kids experience a parent's illness as a challenge and not a trauma. So both challenges and traumas include hard times or adversity. A challenge is experienced with connection, that kids are experiencing it, feeling like they are connected to people who care about them, who are listening to them, who are trying to do what they can do to make things better. Facing challenges well supported builds life skills, increases confidence. Trauma is experienced as adversity alone, where you feel alone and isolated and helpless, and you go forward from a trauma feeling like, uh-oh, what else is going to happen to me that I have no control over? And so it results in more fear and more insecurity. If we do our job well as collaborators with parents, we are going to help them, to help their much loved children to integrate the challenges of a parent's illness, but not to be traumatized by it. And it can go either way. These are some examples of some of our resources. Click through on our website to the parenting principles, which is divided up by age and temperament and topics. The dozen lessons learned are the same things that are in a brochure that I have at the back of the room. The handout is there too. There are frequently asked questions. There's an educator toolkit that you may want to share with the schools that your children attend, or at least read through it yourself. And then our Harvard book, the McGraw-Hill book, there's an example of it at the back of the room. Much of what's in it is on the website for free. And then the Arthur Health series is about resilience, sort of more broadly. And then the Arthur booklet, when someone you know has cancer, is downloadable off the website too, and it's in both English and Spanish. And with that, I will stop. Thank you.